All right. Kind of summarize the news that I've been paying attention to. This is not everything that's been going on. This is not even a full anything. This is just my impression. And I don't mean that like I'm going to perform and act as if I were. I mean my impression as in what it has impressed upon me. First and foremost, there is there's kind of a tiered logic to priorities and importance of types of news. Now, there are things that, on the small scale, bottom, immediate, can directly personally affect you, or me, or any of us, right? So, certain things within the bottom tier actually are acutely important, right? It's one of those things, having a gun, not having a gun while getting robbed, or home invasion, or whatever. Like, these are like little things, right? But they have an immediate effect. Then there are worldwide global things, a few of which can have immediate effect, nuclear war, etc. But above that is fundaments of the universe behaving in the way that they behave that happen to affect us, some of which occasionally, very, very rarely, can directly affect us. On that, it would be like a Carrington event, solar flash kind of thing, or worse. Meteors, comets, stuff like that, right? So I'm going to start with that. About 2 days ago, the sun launched one of the most probably powerful flares that we've ever seen. It was directly, diametrically opposite facing Earth. So the sun's here, the Earth is here, and it went that way. And it was straight out the equator, or roughly. I mean, it was from what we would call, it appears to be the northern hemisphere, but actually it's the southern hemisphere of the sun. The sun's north pole is that way, according to our view with the northern hemisphere here. Our magnetic field is upside down relative to the sun's, which has some effect. And when we have a magnetic field flip, that has an effect as well. That's many thousands of years cycles. So the sun blew off a coronal mass ejection, which was a perfect halo, which if it had been an Earth-facing solar flare, the halo coming off like this, like what you basically got is you've got, you'll see these things on the, what is it, the SOHO? No. Give me a second. LASCO. It's the LASCO satellites. So basically what will happen is you'll have on your viewfinder, like what you're seeing, will be like this, a little stick, right? And there will be a little spherical or circular disc. And basically what that does is it covers up the sun itself in the frame so that all you really see is the other stuff around it, because this thing is mad bright. So what happens is you get this halo poof, and if it's an Earth-facing flare, the other satellites that view the sun directly without obfuscation, for the purpose of directly observing the different wavelengths of radiation that it produces, the solar flares are predominantly in ultraviolet, although there are X-ray production and proton production events as well that take place within all of this. So you have the majority of solar flare that occurs when the sun does a flare. This is not the same thing as a prominence. This is not the things rip and loose. That's usually a consequence of a flare. But it doesn't always come with a flare. There are filaments that will break off the magnetic field lines, do the things they do. It's hard to explain. So much going on in, on, and around the sun. And it is the place where the quantum and the macro physical, the relativistic, begin to mingle. And it's really crazy. It's nuts how little we actually know about how that works. We have theories, we have ideas, we have guesses. But so, a solar flare is usually where a magnetic field loop occurs between two parts of a sunspot group that have, and sometimes between two different sunspot groups. That's the one that happened across the equator. That there was a pretty gnarly X-class long duration flare that happened about like 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think I might have even mentioned it in a video. But in the case of any typical flare, what happens is there is an extremely bright little area And when it reaches to the point of an upper level M or an X class flare, what ends up happening is the polarization and the brightness of the photon stream of what is being released from this, it's like a synchrotron or a cyclotron or something, that this it's a particle accelerator, and the loop of the magnetic field that this particle accelerator is, just doing out kind of above the surface of the sun a little bit, is usually 2 or 3 Earths could fit inside of them on the small ones. And they're moving at the speed of light in these loops, and by passing through the chromosphere and the corona and all of the dust and plasma and gas and everything that's about in the system there, plus the heat and everything else, it gets even hotter, it goes even faster, and it releases some pretty wild amounts of ultraviolet radiation. And when it gets to the point of an X class flare, basically you have your B class, your C class. B class we don't even mess with, because generally speaking, the sun tends to be just below the sea level as a baseline. So a B class flare is basically the sun being on all the time. It's at least always at that level. Now, the C flares is where things get a little more active. It's like, the flame is licking, it's not just embers kind of thing, right? To use an analogy, because it's not really flame. They deceive us by using orange colors on the sun, but if you look at the other spectra, they will show, like, there's a teal one and a blue one and a purple one and a pink one and an orange one and a green one and a blue one. All these different colors represent different wavelengths of light, because it's all photons. So this little loop thing gets so fast and it accelerates, and it releases X-rays, and it releases in just incredible amounts of ultraviolet. And we don't notice it in the visible spectrum. We don't notice the sun getting brighter. In the ultraviolet, and a bit in the X-rays, if it's strong enough of a flare, it will ionize our top of our atmosphere, allowing a bit more cosmic rays, which are protons. Just protons. It's a hydrogen minus neutrons minus an electron. It's just protons, right? They can be pretty nasty. And we basically get, for every long duration solar flare, whatever part of the world is facing the sun that is facing the flare tends to get an X-ray, like when you go to the doctor and you get an X-ray done. That kind of a dose, but prolonged over time. And when you get into an X flare, it's even more. So the thing is, the difference between the B class to the C class threshold and the C class to the M class threshold is 100. There are 10 levels of gradation that they measure these in, and there's decimal points and stuff. If you reach a C10, it is an M1. It's the same thing. That's why you'll see an M9, 9 point whatever, or they'll just call it an M. Then, the difference in gradation from an M1 to an M10, which is an X1, is another 100. Not 10, 100. And from an X1 to as high as it wants to go, it is an exponential curve moving upward in power. An X99 flare would be 1,000,000 times more powerful than an X1, or something like. They suspect that the flare that went off on the far side of the sun 2 days ago was probably at least an X10, but they don't know, because there's no satellites in that direction that see the flare itself and measure the photon stream. How strong of a light is that? But what it did do is blow off this big, perfectly circular, diametrically opposite from Earth, like a practice shot. If that had happened facing us, seeing that poof would imply a direct Earth impact component would occur. Typically, it takes 2 to 3 days. They measured the speed of this, and if the speed measurement is correct, at 3,000 kilometers per second, it is over twice as fast as the previous record holder for fastest moving coronal mass ejection, and that one came from like an X5 or something. So they have no idea. We know that in about a few days here yet, that sunspot should rotate back around into view. And if it's still rocking and rolling, who knows? So when I mentioned the Carrington event, what basically happened with that was somewhere, I think it was in the 1850s or 1880s, something like that, 1890s, I don't know. The last half of the 19th century, the sun unleashed an Earth facing super flare that included a couple of different coronal mass ejections and smaller flares leading up to the super flare in just such a sequence that they created kind of a vacuum pocket between of energy density. Okay, it's already space vacuum or whatever, but of energy density between these multiple waves that the one caught up with the others, and it was like when they call it a cannibal. But usually with the cannibal wave, they combine, but they lose energy as they do it. And this one instead, the first one cleared the way for the second one to just blitz on while and then the super flare hit. And the thing is, my understanding is the coronal mass ejection moving at 3,000 kilometers per second would take less than a day to arrive, not 2 to 3 days like the ones we normally see. A cannibal one would take about a day and a half to 2. This one would take like 6 or 8 hours to arrive at an Earth radius distance from the sun, which means that once we're like, oh shit, that was a damn bright flare, and all of our power goes down, and we're like, wait, what? And then this thing hits auroras in the daytime, and the polar absorption event, and a ton of people getting a very high dose of X-rays, ultraviolet. If you're out directly in the sun while this is happening, you're not only catching a little bit more X-rays than you probably should. You're getting sunburned very quickly. There's all kinds of different cancer risks to do with this ionizing radiation. And it's ionizing the atmosphere when it does this, right? If that had hit us, we would have been reverted basically to the Stone Age. Now, we would have had the understanding of modern knowledge and technology for those of us who know how to do things like filter water, reload a bullet, make fire, gunpowder, know how to cultivate wild plants and survive, right? The people that know these things know how to get by. The people that know about electronics and technology and things could get together and rebuild technology to aid having a new infrastructure. I mean, obviously, roads are still there. Law enforcement and modern technology like firearms, we have, metal tools and everything. So it's not exactly Stone Age. But let me say, we would be immediately reverted to late 1700s colonial life by the solar flare that went off diametrically opposite from our planet 2 days ago. So that's the top tier news. That is the things, the acts of God news, right? I don't know anything. I won't classify a bird flu as an act of God. I don't know what's going on with that. I'm not hearing or seeing much. I'm not exactly seeking the information. If people start getting horribly sick, I stop going around people. World politics news. What can I say? It's World War III. The business with that 2 Russian Su-27 jets taking down the MQ-69 or whatever the fuck drone. My understanding of that was that the Russian fighter pilots, which the United States Military Department of Defense or whoever their spokesperson called unprofessional. The reason they called it unprofessional was that these fighter pilots were hot dogging. They were out flying over the Black Sea, which is basically half Russian territory, but it's international waters. Okay, cool, I get you, but just look at where it's located on a map and you'd be like, oh, I see. So they had every right to patrol their international waters, and there was a United States drone patrolling the same international waters. Now, in these international waters, last week, I believe it was, the Ukrainian military or special forces or somebody from Ukraine took out a flagship vessel of the Russian fleet in the Black Sea based on information that was likely gathered from, for example, MQ-69 or whatever the fuck drone that was persistently flying over the same area. But what these guys did was apparently a Top Gun thing where they fly the jet up upside down over the other one. They release their fuel purge so that it tinkle piss fuel on the vehicle. And then after that, you're supposed to basically continue on around the loop to underneath and then pull out. But apparently, what happened was the pilot miscalculated what would happen because the vehicle he was bird dogging or top gunning or whatever the fuck he was doing was not jet propelled. It was propeller driven. And so something to do with his jet's exhaust and the suction from his jet intakes is what caused the propeller to like dink into the jet. Like the unless the drone was told by its pilot to go like that, what happened was is that the other jet came around like this, and as soon as he came around and went to break off or whatever, it sucked the drone in, and the drone went down. The other option being looking at it, which does make a lot of sense, is that if they collided with it as opposed to shooting it, it's kind of a, call my bluff kind of thing. I see that. But really, I think these pilots were just fucking with the drone. But geez, man, they want us to go to war, don't they? Except at the same time, now we got slightly lower tier. We got this bank collapse thing happening. That's pretty nuts. If you're not stocking up on ammo and food right now, don't you go raiding my shit, right? Because I have food, but I also have ammo and guns, which means that my food is not your food. This is the way it's going to be. And if the sun comes around with this same sunspot group and it blows one right at us and knocks our power out for six months or a year, people are going to have to learn how to winter without electricity. They're going to have to learn how to summer without air conditioning. In both instances, there will be a lot of casualties. People are going to have to learn how to feed themselves without a store. In the more acute news, in and amongst this bank fail, World War III drama, son taking pot shots, the illegitimately installed leader of the free world, as it were, is making motions of executive orders that once again moving toward things to do with telling me what I can or cannot own as a private individual 1,000+ miles away from this stupid motherfucker who has zero clue about my life, what it's about, or what it takes to survive. So, I don't know, man. There may be other things. I mean, geez, what, 2 days ago, a day and a half ago, Trump was about an hour from me, hour and a half. He actually did a Q&A. I don't know how planted those people with the questions were, but certainly puts a negative light on any politician and or president that refuses to even talk to the press. Of course, we know why. He doesn't know what day it is, what year it is, what time it is, what his own name is most of the time, that guy. We're also watching on the middle tier to things that may impact us kind of thing too. Watching the absolute collapse of a number of narratives. While simultaneously, things like the bank, the World War, and the gun control are meant to keep us distracted from that. But the race hoax thing is falling apart. Most people understand that there was a dupe going on. A lot of people, when it comes to that whole grift, maybe don't want to say anything because they're still worried that that mob may come after them, and it's possible, but I don't think the money is there to pay the mob to do that. And I don't mean the mob like the mafia, I mean the mob like a crowd of crazy, stupid people under mind control and fully demoralized, fighting in favor of a thing they think is good that will bring more bad than any good for justice. The boys in girls' clothes or whatever is also in the process of eroding. And I don't mean it like I have any personal issue with anybody who is of that persuasion, but it is a sign of the decay of our society. And it typically, you look at the end of the Roman Empire, the beginning of the Dark Ages, that was also present then. So, what else? Oh yeah, the J6. Is there any doubt in anybody's mind at this time that it wasn't plotted, planned, and allowed to happen? Pearl Harbor style, 9/11 style? Is that why they kept... I mean, isn't that the thing that those two particular events have in common, aside from the fact that they were both used as a rallying cry, something to circle the wagons around? In both cases, somebody knew something was going to happen. Somebody let something happen so that the desired response would be warranted and justified. Anybody else think of that? Anybody else notice that? The summation of all of this news is that government of the people, for the people, and by the people is better in most ways than monarchy, tyranny, totalitarianism. But there is a problem when people who disagree with that type of mentality infiltrate and co-opt the infrastructure to disinform, demoralize, and otherwise render useful but useless as many people as possible. Undermine your society, make it so that nothing is cohesive at this point. I think we're going to have, aside from experimental procedure-related fertility issues, people are simply going to stop reproducing because nobody's going to be able to stand each other. And the only offspring that are really going to end up being brought into the world then will be the ones either of violence or of utter stupidity, which means that the future is doomed. The other thing being that these dumb fuckers are going to inherit the earth and they're not going to know how to populate it. And they're going to die out. Part of that, I think, is a plan because of the whole idea of a reset. Everybody keeps talking about things keep getting worse. We know what the obvious solutions are, and we keep watching the government take the opposite direction from the obvious solutions, which means that they are intentionally and willfully bringing it down. It is, in fact, a controlled demolition of our economy, of our society, of our culture. And what will supposedly rise in its place will be people under control, satisfied by much less, tricked into believing that the things that they don't actually own are real. And, I mean, what else is there to say about it? That's a bad deal. It's not good. And once again, this mindless people of the promise of good thing, what you're proposing and suggesting actually brings a lot more suffering and death. So, seize your day, folks. I'm not saying go after the things you desire. I'm saying seize the day to prepare. There's going to come a point where you're going to be like, well, fuck, I should have seized that day because now I don't have time and I'm not prepared. And there will be no one to blame but yourself. So, beware the sun. Sun, sun, Mr. Golden Sun, kill my enemies. Right? But watch out for the people that are trying to get us into a war that we don't need to be into. One that will happen either way, probably. One that could end up taking place between two completely different countries where the one that I'm in, America, is not the center of attention. And do you know what American people are going to be like? when we're not the center of attention in world war? Stupid. It's just going to be stupid. So Russia and China are going to nuke each other. We're going to be a casualty of that. Oh, and by the way, there is some reason to think that they may be scouting out Pearl Harbor already for an intercontinental strike. New York is in their sights. If you're living in a coastal large city, definitely get out of town. And if you're living anywhere else, man, it's going to be a crapshoot. The way the prevailing wind goes, if they use a dirty bomb and nuke the West Coast, that's going to affect the Midwest here. And if they nuke the Midwest, that's going to affect the East Coast. And eventually it'll affect the ocean. It'll start affecting Europe. So, that's all for this one. As I've said before, the last line of the last verse, the last chapter, the last book of the Bible. Keep that peace of Christ with you, just like you're on the cross.